You're listening to Revenge of the Drive-In, the podcast where we watch and review two movies normally randomly selected from a list of over 1,800. This time, we chose our own movies. As we approach the end of the season, we wanted to go out on a bit of a bang, and I think we've done that here. I am your host, Patrick, and I am joined by...
Jim. Hello, everybody. Hello, Patrick.
So we talked about Jim's pick, which was Big Trouble in Little China, the John Carpenter 1986 film.
Mm-hmm.
And we also watched The Street Fighter, the 1974 film starring Sonny Chiba, which is a film that I don't believe... Well, I certainly didn't see it before. I don't believe you saw it.
I definitely did
either.
Not see it, no.
Yeah, and that's why I picked it, because I had heard a little bit about it, had never seen it, wanted to see it, and I don't regret my decision. But Big Trouble in Little China, Jim, you are a big fan of this, correct?
Huge fan. I think I probably saw it, I was pretty young, maybe around 7 years old.
Okay.
My dad was a huge fan of the movie. He was like maybe one of the several million people who bought it after it came out, after it was a major flop in theaters.
Okay.
Yeah, and I watched it. We still have the original VHS copy at my parents' house. I love it. I think it's probably my favorite John Carpenter movie. I know, I know he's got a few really good ones, but I just love Big Trouble in Little China. It just speaks to me.
Yeah, I think I had only seen this once all the way through before because there were so many parts of it that I didn't remember. I did not remember there being monsters in it. There's like 3 monsters. I don't remember that.
That's great.
So, yeah, you know, it felt like a kind of a refreshing experience because a lot of it I remembered, but so much of it I hadn't. So,
like, it's a weird movie because it is a cult classic. It is this cult hit, I guess, this home video hit. It really flopped in theaters. I think it only made about $1 million in North America.
Well, you were implying it flopped on home video too. You said your dad was one of the few people to buy it on home video.
Well, it did better on home video than it did in theaters. That's for sure.
For the record, I would just like to say I know John Carpenter has kind of a bad track record of a lot of his best movies weren't super successful when they came out. The big one obviously being The Thing. Mm-hmm. I can 100% understand why this didn't do well when it came out. It's such a weird tongue-in-cheek movie where if you didn't watch it and you kind of just heard there was this movie called Big Trouble in Little China and you knew there was it's like an action-adventure fantasy like mysticism thing, you'd probably be thinking, oh, that's probably a racist movie. That's probably just stupid and I don't want to see that, right?
It's probably a racist movie. Yeah. Well, it's funny that you say that because I was looking into it a bit. So like you said, came out in 86. Speaking of 86, it was originally meant to be set in the 1880s. It was written by, I have it written down here. It was the original screenplay was written by Gary Goldman and David Z. Weinstein. They had written a story about a Western set in the 1880s, but screenwriter W.D. Richter was hired to completely revamp the script and modernize it. And then 20th Century Fox brought on Carpenter to direct it. They really kind of pumped it out. They rushed it out because apparently there's some Eddie Murphy movie coming out in the next couple of years that had a similar story. And I've never even heard of this movie. It's called The Golden Child.
Oh, I've seen the poster of that. Yeah, there's some Asian. I don't know what it's about, but there's there's some Chinese stuff on the poster, I want to say.
But yeah, so it was this weird kind of project that came literally from nowhere. It was like a studio, I guess, had a script, and they were like, hey, you know what would be better if we just set this in the modern era, in modern San Francisco? And, let's get Kurt Russell, and let's get John Carpenter. He makes weird movies. This might be kind of up his alley. And apparently John Carpenter was actually really excited to do this movie because it was going to be the first time that he worked on a kung fu kind of action martial arts movie. This is the movie, though, infamously, that made him walk away from Hollywood. So, because of the rushed production...
Wait, hang on. Citation needed there. I mean, he did several movies after this.
This is the one that he really didn't... That made him really hate the Hollywood movie machine.
So the studio system, specifically.
Yeah, exactly. So he stepped away from that and became an independent kind of producer on a lot of movies. He did come back occasionally for some movies, but he after this movie, he really took a step out of Hollywood. Yeah, and in his words, I have it written down here, he said, Big Trouble was the reason I stopped making movies for the Hollywood studios. I won't work for them again. I think Big Trouble is a wonderful film, and I'm very proud of it. But the reception it received, and the reasons for that reception, were too much for me to deal with. I'm too old for that sort of bullshit.
So, in essence, Big Trouble gave him big trouble.
Yeah, it's just like a lot of things that shouldn't work, but in my opinion, they do work, and it makes for a really enjoyable movie.
All right, care to get started on the plot then?
Okay, so the first character we meet is a fella named Egg Shen, and he's played by Victor Wong.
He's the guy from Tremors, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I've probably seen him in other stuff. This movie's littered with, like, every Asian character actor in Hollywood at this time is, like, in this movie, and I definitely recognized him, yeah. Is he also the one in Gremlins?
No.
I don't think he is, but I'm willing to bet the shop owner in Gremlins is probably in this movie, but I'm not sure which character he is.
Well, James Hong is in this, and he's, like, the Asian American actor.
Yeah,
like
he's been in more movies than almost anybody. I think he's maybe Eric Roberts has him beat because Eric Roberts makes 45 movies a year, but yeah.
Oh, also, I'm going to butcher his name, but it's Gerald Okamura.
Yes, Big Trouble in Little Tokyo with him because he is a Japanese actor.
Yeah. He shows up throughout the movie as kind of like a bad guy in a gang. So the first character we meet is Egg Shen. He drives a tour bus in San Francisco through Chinatown. He's being interviewed by an attorney, and the attorney asks where Jack Burton is. Like, something's happened. We're beginning at the end. Mm-hmm. And, so this attorney says, where's Jack Burton? And Egg Shen gets really heated, and he shouts, "Leave him alone!" And he says something like, "We owe him a debt of gratitude," or something, I don't know. And then this attorney says, "Oh, and all this Chinese magical stuff, do you believe in that?" And he goes, "Of course I do." Then he starts shooting lightning between his palms. And then we just kind of cut straight to Kurt Russell driving a semi down the highway, really spouting nonsense over his truck radio to these other poor truckers.
Yeah, he's just kind of saying whatever. It's just kind of a weird introduction. He's not.
Yeah.
He's just like telling stories, but certainly the first time I saw it. It took me a long time to kind of adjust to the Kurt Russell performance because his accent is so it's like he's saying everything sarcastic, and I think it overall it works for the character, but it takes you a while to kind of get used to the performance. It's an issue I have with certain Johnny Depp characters where he's doing a goofy voice or something, and it's just like, okay, this is a good performance. I just have to adjust to it.
Yeah, Kurt Russell's he's over the top.
Yes,
he's also spot on for the. Kind of guy
I don't disagree. I'm just saying. I think for a viewer who maybe isn't that familiar with this movie, I think they might be thinking like, oh, what is going on? This is weird. But yeah, certainly, I think it pays off eventually because the entire character is just like. I don't know if this will make any sense, but I would compare him to Bruce Campbell in the like Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness, and a little bit Ash vs. the Evil Dead. Not necessarily giving the same performance, but a similar character where he's super confident and completely inept, and he doesn't understand how useless he is, and he's just so overconfident. It's a similar kind of performance, I guess, in that way.
Yeah, he's the overconfident, bumbling fool. He like... I think there's one scene where he shoots a guy, right? He just kind of stops, and this other character, Eddie, goes, "Is that the first time you ever plugged somebody, Jack?" And he goes, "Oh, of course not, and of course it is." Like he's...
'Cause he has to keep up his manhood, yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, Jack pulls into a market in Chinatown, and he eventually makes his way to a group of guys gambling, and they play all through the night and into the next day. At the end, Jack Burton has come away with a little over $1,000. His friend, sitting directly across from him, and the only person left at the table, Wang, he tries to win his money back by cutting a beer bottle in half with a machete. And not only does he fail, but he also makes Jack Burton look really, really cool. He slices the bottle, it shoots off the table, and he catches it. Jack Burton catches it, and I think he says, "It's all in the reflexes."
Mm-hmm.
Which comes back at the end. We're setting it up. After a bit of friendly back and forth, Jack decides to take Wang to the airport to meet a woman, Miao Yin. She's flying over from China, and Wang is going to propose to her. But while at the airport, Jack strikes up a conversation with Gracie Law, who we're introduced to later, fully, I guess. But she's a lawyer who's also waiting at the airport for a woman coming from China.
What are the odds that someone with the last name Law becomes a lawyer?
Yeah, I know.
It's like
she's played by Kim Cattrall, by the way.
Right. It's like when Lou Gehrig ended up getting Lou Gehrig's disease. Like, what are the odds of that?
You're an idiot. So anyways, yeah, she's waiting for another woman at the airport. They don't really interact, but Gracie grabs Jack as like a group of Chinese gang members walk by. She goes, "Don't mess with them. They're a tough Chinese street gang."
Yeah, what are they called? Like the Sons of Death or something like that?
No, it's the Lords of the Lords of Death. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah,
that was close.
And they look so super dope. They're wearing like dumb glasses. They're my favorite characters in the movie, maybe. But they're also at the airport, and it's really weird. You can tell something's about to kick off. So the gates open, Miao Yin comes out, and Wang starts moving towards her, and this woman, Tara, comes out. And that's the woman that Gracie was waiting for.
Right.
But as she comes out, the gang moves towards this woman. And Jack steps in to try to stop them. And they just kind of beat him up a bit. They don't really, like, kick the crap out of him, but they rough him up. But in the confusion that he creates, Gracie and this woman run away. And instead they take Wang's girlfriend hostage.
Fiance. Hostage.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think he calls her his fiance, but you're right, he hasn't technically proposed yet.
So we don't know why they took her, but they did. Wang has a good idea of where they've headed to, so Jack and Wang hop back in the semi and drive to the gang's hideout.
Which it should be noted is does not have a truck attached to it. It's just the front of the semi. What do you call that? It's
the cab.
The cab. Okay.
I'm a real trucker, Patrick. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're one of those weird Canadian. Letterkenny people, you know this trucker stuff that I don't.
I was going to say, do you think this movie's big with truckers? Because it's all about a trucker doing something really cool.
It's a good question. There aren't too many movies that I can think of that, feature truckers in such prominent roles. It's like this and Smokey and the Bandit, right? I mean, what else?
Yeah. Anyways, they're trying to go get Miao Yin back. They head down this back alley, but get stopped by a gang's funeral procession. I think the gang's name is the Chang Sing or something like that.
Yeah, this is the good gang.
This is the good gang.
The good gang has the yellow. They keep saying turbans, but really they just have like yellow like scarves or ropes
and like headbands and stuff.
Yeah.
Just as Jack and Wang are going to try to back out of the alleyway and go a different way, a rival gang shows up behind them, wearing red and black,
with Al Leong and Gerald Nakamura. Al Leong, classic Asian American character actor, always like a baddie. He's one of the terrorists in Die Hard. He's in a few Andy Sedaris movies. He's in a bunch of stuff. And then Gerald Nakamura, of course, from Samurai Cop, among other classic low budget like 80s action. He's in a few Andy Sedaris movies as well. Come to think of it,
isn't he in one we watched?
No, I don't think he's in either of the ones because we did Picasso Trigger. And then, or maybe, I don't remember Picasso Trigger too well, but we did the commentary track on Hard Ticket to Hawaii. I don't believe he's in either of those.
Never mind then.
Check out our Patreon for that commentary track and many others.
So anyways, these two gangs just start blasting each other away with like machine guns and pistols and stuff. And and Jack and Wang are stuck in the middle of it in their semi. As the dust is kind of settling, they all pull out hand weapons, and they just race down the alleyway towards each other in this big gang brawl, and it's awesome.
I liked this, how it's kind of visually represented, because it's not a full-on, like, zero-sum, but, like, I would say 90% of the really dangerous weapons, be they guns or sharp-edged weapons, are all with the bad gang. And then the good gang has more like sticks or poles or whatever they kind of like the Donatello weapon in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that kind of thing. Whereas so it's visually represented that the bad guys are just like really dangerous. It's not completely all the way because when those other three guys show up, I think it's the good guys that shoot at them. So there are some good guys with guns, I guess. But what's your favorite part of this fight scene? Because I have one.
I don't know. There's so much going on, but the one that stands out to
yeah.
me is the one where the guy puts the 2x4 behind somebody's head.
I was going to say that exact one, yeah.
And then
It's so
knees his
random.
head
Like,
through
where
the
did he get
2x4.
that?
I know. I like that so much. I also like that set.
Oh, I was going to say that too, but yeah, because when they run from that thing, there's like one long take of them running into another alley, and it's so you see it's all one set. It's an impressive set. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Overall, this film just absolutely shines in its production design. All of you get the street / alley sets, which are great, and then all the fantastical interiors. They're just it just looks great. It's a very good looking movie.
Yeah, I agree. Especially like all the neon later on in the movie. I think it's great.
Oh yeah, and the final. I was thinking even more like the one with all the golden statues. That's my favorite set.
Lopan's palace or whatever you want to call it. Not his wedding venue.
his wedding temple. That's with the neon. I got a Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets vibe at the end of that movie. They're in
like at the
with where the
snake,
the giant snake. That that set kind of reminded me of that. Just it's a lot brighter and stuff because of the neon. But
yeah, I got kind of like I don't even know. It was you could call it like trashy Harry Potter because I think like I like neon, but I think as soon as you add it to stuff, it just it looks a little trashy. You know what I mean?
There's a case for that. There's also a case for just everything looking a little slicker, though. I think it depends on the context because when I think
depends
neon,
on the color of the neon too.
That's probably true, but because I can be picturing like old school 42nd Street, New York City, which was just porno theater after porno theater and like peep shows, and it's like the trashiest thing ever. Neon is part of that, but then you also have like the Miami Vice, and everything is nice looking, and so I don't know. I mean, it is Miami Vice, but Miami has a hipper look to it, I guess. With the
when I think of Miami Vice, the color of neon I think of is like that mint green kind of neon that was in this movie, and like a pinky kind of neon, which was also
I think
movie.
I think the pink and kind of the soft blue.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that one too. I gotcha. Okay, anyway, these two gangs are still going at it in this back alley. The only thing that stops them is the arrival of some supernatural kung fu masters. I think they're called the Three Storms.
Yeah. There's a scene, I think maybe it's the uncle, maybe it's Egg Shen providing some like background. They refer to something as like the Furies. And maybe that's these guys, maybe it's something else, I don't know.
Oh yeah, I don't remember.
I was mostly just curious about that because I don't expect this movie to closely follow Chinese philosophy in history and anything like that. But I'm curious if there is like a Furies thing in Chinese lore, because there's the Furies obviously in ancient Greece and everything. So I was just kind of curious about that. But
well, I'm also curious about like Lo Pan. If there is a story, I mean, not necessarily the same name, but if there is a story of like somebody who was cursed by an emperor to live forever in like this incorporeal state. Anyways, these three guys show up. It's the Three Storms. I think they're called like Thunder, Lightning, and Rain. The first appears out of a big green explosion. The second floats down from the sky in rain. And then the last one descends on like a lightning bolt, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then, as you said earlier, the White Gang just starts blasting these guys, but bullets aren't even doing anything to them. And then I love this scene so much. These Three Storms like pull out these big like Gurkha knives, and they use magic and like levitate them into their hands, and then jump in the air, spin, and then whip the knives and sort of just start killing everybody.
What did you call those knives?
Like Gurkha knives. I don't think that's what they are, but that's what they remind me of.
Okay. Well, because
like
isn't there a Klingon weapon that resembles this?
Oh, is there? I don't know.
Yeah, the Klingon sword kind of resembles this. It's just a giant version, a little bit.
I'm looking at a kukri, a Kukri, and I think that's the knives that like traditionally
for Cocoa Puffs.
Gurkhas. Yeah, okay, yeah. I think that's the knives that traditionally Gurkha soldiers carried.
What's that about gherkins?
Yeah. My God. So Jack and Wang finally decide, they're like, hey, we got to get the hell out of here. So they try to drive away, but this tall, kind of scary-looking Chinese man, decked out in white face paint, is standing in front of the truck. And Jack just mows him down. But when he hops out of the truck, the guy's standing behind the truck. And this is Lo Pan. Light then shoots out of his eyes and then his mouth, and he kind of temporarily blinds Jack. And as you kind of alluded to earlier, they run from that alleyway set in this long shot into another alleyway where Jack regains his sight, but the gang from earlier, the Lords of Death, are there. So they have to run back into this other alleyway where you just see like dead bodies strewn all over the place.
It's an impressive long shot, especially with the amount of just people in there, extras or actors, however many there are.
Yeah. Well, eventually they get out of there and they make their way back to Wang's restaurant. And we're kind of getting like a bit of backstory to who Lo Pan is, who these three Storms are. Jack is on the phone, wearing like a kimono or something.
Well, yeah, because he just wants his truck back, and he's calling to make an insurance claim, and I think they're just going to say the truck was stolen or whatever, because they're not going back to get the truck, because obviously there's people dropping like flies all over the place.
Well, then we get Gracie Law showing up at the restaurant, and this is the same woman from the airport. And the three of them together, they come up with a plan to save Miao Yin, who Gracie Law says is most likely held at a whorehouse run by the Lords of Death.
And they make a point of she's got green eyes, which is very unusual for Chinese women,
rare.
so they think that's why they have her, and they're trying to make her a prostitute. But then this is Wang's friend.
Eddie,
yeah, he's kind of the tall guy. I enjoyed him.
Yeah, he's good. I like him. But yeah, you're right. So like Eddie, Gracie, Jack, and Wang, they all drive over to the whorehouse. Jack has to go in dressed as kind of like this dweeby-looking businessman. And he's got like his hair like combed to the side, and he's wearing like these big kind of goofy glasses.
Oh yeah, because Kurt Russell has a mullet in this movie. First of all,
he does, yeah.
Which is a very 80s look.
Yeah, and then actually, and this might be a very 80s look for a poor-looking businessman. You know what I mean?
Brown
like
suit, yellow shirt, just kind of an ugly getup. Yeah.
Yeah. So he walks in and he wants to find Miao Yin. And he says, I'd really like a girl with green eyes if you have that, you know what I mean? And the woman running the establishment says, Asian girls don't have green eyes. And she kind of walks away. But as it turns out, she is being held there in like a secret room. So as Jack is just kind of hanging out, one of the Storms shows up and blasts a hole in the ceiling and steals, or kidnaps rather, Miao Yin and takes her to Lo Pan. So the Wing Kong exchange, that is Lo Pan's front for whatever he's doing. Wang knows where it is, and he's going to go by himself. But Jack is like, no, I'm going with you. We're gonna rescue her together.
So they know Lo Pan as a shady businessman.
Yeah.
Not as a magical wizard.
No, but Egg Shen and
right.
Wang's dad at the restaurant
I think
a
uncle, but
wizard.
yeah.
Oh yeah, uncle. They know him as like a weird ancient wizard. But like Wang doesn't believe in that, and imagine trying to get a John Wayne-esque person to believe in that.
Right.
So.
Also, this scene has one of my favorite lines of the movie, because earlier there was a thing where Gracie Law said she couldn't go into the whorehouse because they would instantly recognize her or something. And then here she's like saying, "Oh, I would go too," and then Kurt Russell's just like, "Yeah, I know, but there's a problem with your face." Yeah. It's just like the bluntest delivery. It's hilarious.
Yeah, it's great.
Also, when does the journalist come into the story? I think it's around here, isn't it?
Like right about this time. Actually, it's right before they go into the whorehouse. She runs into her car.
Yeah, was it earlier?
Yeah, because her name's Margot.
Margot, yeah, because that never really... She kind of just comes into the story, doesn't really have a huge impact on it. I feel like that was just weird. They didn't need that character.
Yeah, they didn't. She was kind of like wasted screen space. Probably she was there for like minor comedic relief.
Your main character's comedic relief, though. You don't need her.
Yeah, I agree. You could have removed her, just like what's his face in Hush, that boyfriend.
Oh God, I don't remember. David something, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Paul.
Oh, it might have actually been Paul.
I don't know. I'm just throwing names out here.
Well, anyways, Jack and Wang head in and they slip past the guards and they make their way to a hidden door and they find an elevator behind it. They make their way into this elevator. They start going down, but it stops abruptly and it starts filling with water. It totally fills with water, but they're able to kind of pry the doors open and swim out into this room that's filled with water and corpses that have been hung upside down. So they're kind of freaking out a little. And then they look up through like kind of a sewer grate and they see one of the storms up there who presumably hauls them out, because the next scene we see is that they're getting tortured by this weird, like, magical ball.
Yeah.
There's lots of weird little magical stuff in this movie. But it does make for an interesting movie, to be honest, because you're constantly wondering why these things exist. So after they're tortured briefly, they're taken to Lo Pan, tied to wheelchairs. And when they meet Lo Pan this time, he looks completely different from what he looked last time. Now he's like a decrepit old man, wheelchair bound, and he just looks really gross and old, you know? Like, really gross.
A little bit of, like, the grandpa from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just, like, super old age makeup, like, older than a human being should ever be type makeup.
Yeah.
And it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. Like, you can tell it's makeup, but it's certainly conveys age and an advanced age that a human wouldn't normally be.
Yeah. Well, and that's good that you bring that up, because in this scene, both Lo Pan and Wang explained that Lo Pan was cursed with oh my god, I can barely pronounce this word. Help me out here.
Incorporeal?
Yeah. In like his young form, he can't touch anything or interact with anything. But the only way he can become flesh and bone and can interact with objects and people in the world is if he takes on this decrepit old man form.
Right.
But to break this curse, he has to find and marry a Chinese girl with green eyes and then kill her to appease this emperor that placed the curse on him, like 2,000 years ago.
He has to pull an O.J. Simpson.
Oh, no. Let's not...
Come on, it's the one person we're allowed to offend. Come on.
Yeah, you're right.
He's OJ.
I mean, he's in prison now, right? So
I don't think he is.
I thought he was brought back to prison.
He was brought back to prison recently, like 15 years ago, but he got out recently, more recently than that.
Well, Jack and Wang are then moved into a different cell where immediately Jack flips his wheelchair over and begins to free himself and Wang. But as this is going on, Gracie, Margot, the reporter, and Eddie, they decide that Jack and Wang have been in the building far too long, so they go in to try to find them or help them out. But they are subdued by one of the storms. Shortly after, Jack and... I'm trying to remember how this goes. I think it's Jack and Wang escape. Only after
one of the storms
brings Eddie in.
comes... Yeah, one of the storms comes in, and then they attack him, and then that's... when we established that the guy can shapeshift to some degree.
Well, he can like...
get bigger?
Yeah, puff his body up.
Right. Which one is that? Is that Thunder, by the way?
Yes,
I kind of
that one's
assume, but
Thunder.
it doesn't really matter. Lightning is the only one who's really, like, distinctive in his... Well, or I should say in his abilities matching his name, I guess.
Yeah, and then that leads to kind of a fun scene where they lock Thunder in the cell, and the three of them escape, but Jack has been, like, thrown down this hallway in his wheelchair.
Yeah.
I was like that when I was a kid.
And he almost tumbles into the well where Buffalo Bill is holding the senator's daughter.
Yeah. Yeah. So shortly after that, Eddie leads Jack and Wang to all these cells where Gracie and Margot are kept, and also what I presume are a lot of sex slaves.
Yeah.
So while Eddie and Wang deal with all these female guards, Jack is busy blasting away the locks on all these doors to free all these women.
Oh, and this is where we learn, first of all, that Wang knows martial arts. Like, we haven't really seen him fight yet, and now all of a sudden he's a competent fighter. He's not great.
And I mean, and it looks good. I think, like, all the fighting in this movie looks pretty good for the most part.
I like it's shot in a way where you can always see what's happening, even the big street fight, where I would say it's a hectic scene because there's so many people, but the editing is never hectic. You always understand what's going on within an individual shot, which is nice.
Yeah. So everybody makes their way into the sewer system to escape, and they come out near the entrance of the building. This also leads to another kind of great action scene where they're about to escape through the door, but there's these gang members, these bad gang members behind the door. So Wang takes them all out in this really cool scene of him just like punching people across the room, kicking people onto tables and stuff. And then Kurt Russell dives out from behind a shelf with his gun and his knife after everybody's already been knocked out.
Yeah, because he like dropped his knife or something. So
yeah. Yeah. And again, he's such a bumbling idiot in this movie, but he's so great. He's a great character. Well, everybody runs out of the building. Unfortunately, though, Gracie doesn't. She gets kidnapped by a hairy Sasquatch monster thing that kind of comes out of the wall.
Kind
and
of
just grabs her.
like a mix between like an orangutan and like Bigfoot, because there's like an orange quality.
He's a ginger Bigfoot.
A lovable monster who's got like one expression because the mouth doesn't really move, and he's
it's like the same thing from Harry and the Hendersons, just ugly.
A little bit. A little bit more monstrous than that. Harry and the Hendersons, it's a family movie. You got to make it so he looks like he can be friendly.
Yeah. Yeah, and this Bigfoot creature like takes Gracie down into the depths.
He chains her up.
Yeah, he takes her down to like the depths of this building. Now we're like really entering this weird mystical Chinese world, and she gets chained up, and Lo Pan comes and talks to her. Back at the restaurant, after they've realized that Gracie's not with them, Jack, Wang, Egg Shen, and the Chang Sing all come together to rescue Gracie and Miao Yin and kill Lo Pan. They all head to Egg Shen's place and descend into like this world beneath the streets of Chinatown, which is I love the set. It's all like, it looks ancient, and it's all covered in moss and gunk, and there's like a river running through the middle of this set, but it's not. It's like a river of fog.
Kurt Russell says like, "Hey, that's not water," and Egg Shen is like, "It's the blood of the earth.
It's the black blood of the earth." He goes, "You mean
oil?"
And
then he's like, "What do you mean oil?" And he's like, "No, it's the black blood of the earth." And then he goes in this little like story about how the earth was like flipped upside down at one point, and like something that may or may not be a thing in Chinese mythology, but I like just like little details like that.
Stuff like that made the world feel, I don't know, not real, but it kind of gave some credibility to the world, if that makes sense, Like you could be like, oh, this is really neat. This is all in lore or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think there's enough too of there's a good dynamic with Wang and Jack Burton, because Jack Burton doesn't believe any of this stuff, obviously.
Yeah.
But Wang is always like, no, like, Jack, you have to be Chinese, and I'm Chinese, and I don't even like understand half of this. There's like, it's first of all, it's a perfect dynamic to have Jack as like the protagonist, because things are explained to him, so they were explained to us.
Yeah.
But then Wang, too, as like a balancer, like Egg Shen is the one who knows all of this stuff, believes all of it. Wang just kind of knows a little bit, so he can kind of help Jack along, but there's still a lot of stuff that's mysterious and weird to him. But once we get Egg Shen fully engaged in the story, which is really just in this last act, then it becomes things become more clear, I guess.
Like you have these non-Asian characters, which are like the conduit through which the audience receives all of their information. And it's not even just Jack Burton. It's like, it's other characters too. And then even Wang, because he's like, I don't even understand all this, like as you mentioned. But it makes for like a really kind of interesting way to get information across to the audience. I really enjoy it.
But it also works because this next scene with the two women, when they're like hypnotized or whatever, everything's told visually there. We don't have any exposition as to like what's going on, and we still kind of get what's going on, at least a little bit. Yeah,
so like while the group is moving through this underworld, we keep cutting back to this weird ceremony that Lo Pan has, and I think it's the ceremony of the burning blade, because I think it was mentioned earlier.
Yes, it was mentioned, yeah. And if they survive that, then they're worthy of marriage or something like that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah,
because he wants to marry both of them because they both have green eyes.
Well, he wants to marry both of them, but then kill Gracie Law. Because he has to kill one of them to break the curse or whatever fully. As you mentioned, that scene's done really well. First off, like all the kind of like martial arts weaponry stuff is really interesting to look at. But then you're right, like from our viewpoint, it doesn't really, like nothing really makes sense, but it's just, you realize what's going on after it's happened. You're like, oh, this is some weird kind of ritual where they have to touch a pearl on the ceiling. And, I guess they're worthy. But anyway, so that's all going on. And this is also the same time where we see a monster that you mentioned earlier. It like
Yeah,
comes
the
out of a hole in the
monster
wall.
snatches one of what is the Wang Chung gang? What are they called?
Yeah. The well, no, what are they called?
It's not
The
Wang
Chang-
Chung because that's a
the
band.
Chang Sing.
Chang Sing. Yeah, the monster snatches one of those and just kind of dips out of there. And it's like, oh, that's awesome. You just see it for one shot, and it's really cool.
I don't know. The world is so weird, but I love it. So after trekking through this underworld and stuff, and fighting this monster, and shooting at an eye monster that acts like Lopan's spy, and strolling through Lopan's palace, Egg Shen's group arrives at the wedding. Now, we kind of mentioned this room earlier, but it's like this huge cavernous room full of these giant stone statues that are outlined with neon lights. And it's just such an interesting visual, like it just looks so, I don't know, it's also eye-popping and just interesting to look at. So they let Lo Pan complete the ceremony.
Because they can't touch him, they can't injure him or kill him until he's human.
And then when this big battle breaks out between the Chang Sing and the bad gang from earlier, and Wang is fighting Rain, one of the three storms, and they're sword fighting and stuff and flying through the air and kicking each other and stuff. And Egg Shen is fighting Lo Pan with like this magic sword fight thing. Jack Burton, while everybody else is doing things, spends most of his time on the floor in this battle. First he knocks himself out with some rocks that he shoots out of the ceiling, and then like a body falls on him after he stabs him. And he spends the majority of this battle trying to get the body off of him.
Oh, that was probably the coolest thing he did, other than maybe a little bit later in the movie. But the guy, he's on the ground, and the guy is going to dive on him with a sword, and he has his knife in his boot, and he just sticks it up and stabs the guy. That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
That's a
pretty
fun action
quick thinking,
movie moment.
Yeah.
It's not as awesome as like anything that happens in the next movie, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. So eventually when Jack does get up, him and Gracie chase Lo Pan back upstairs into his palace place. I love it because Jack Burton's got lipstick all over his mouth from kissing Gracie in the elevator going up because she's just decked out in this beautiful makeup. The only thing he has with him is a knife, and he's going to throw it at Lo Pan. And he totally whiffs. He totally misses. And the look he gives is like, oh, I'm such an idiot. You know what I mean? It's like the best look of disappointment I've seen in a movie. Lo Pan picks the knife up and says, well, now I'm going to kill you, Jack Burton. And he whips the knife at him, but man, those reflexes work pretty fast. And Jack catches the knife and then just throws it right back at him, hits him right in the forehead, kills him dead. Wang is still kind of fighting with Thunder, but Thunder comes back in the room and sees that Lo Pan has died. So he literally explodes from anger.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Monty Python...
Fat Man.
The meaning of life or whatever.
Yeah.
The guy just grows giant and explodes.
Yeah, it's a little disturbing. The effects, like, obviously they're fake, and it's not a real human exploding, but the effect is disturbing. You know what I mean? Well, like, it's just like a disturbing looking effect, where like his eyes are bugging out and there's steam coming out of his nose and ears and stuff. Yeah, so they run out into the hallway. The building is collapsing, and they run into lightning, and Egg Shen helps them climb up through a hole in the ceiling with like a crossbow thing, and then he throws a big Buddha statue on Lightning, killing him. And then they all escape, and they all head back to the restaurant to celebrate. Wang and Miao Yin are preparing to marry. You can tell they're in love. Eddie and Margot kind of have a thing going on. Egg Shen decides to go off traveling somewhere. And at the end, you have kind of like these two characters that you want to get together. You have Jack Burton and Gracie Law. But nothing really happens. Like, there's like some tension there, like some sexual tension there. But Jack just leaves. He's like, nah, maybe I'll be back around. We'll see. Maybe I'll see you in the future. And he just leaves. He walks out into the fog of San Francisco. But then we see him driving his truck, and again, spouting nonsense on his radio. And then the Bigfoot creature has stowed away in the back of his truck.
Right.
And then that's the end of the movie. So Patrick, my dear friend, what did you think on your rewatch of Big Trouble in Little China? What did you think about it?
Yeah, I like the movie. It's not my favorite. It's not my favorite John Carpenter film. I do really appreciate the commitment to the protagonist never having a goddamn clue what's going on. I think that makes for a very funny, entertaining experience, and I think Kurt Russell plays that very well. And I like the world, the the look of the world, whether it's, the creatures, the monster design, which we didn't spend a whole lot of time on the eye creature. I thought that was like the coolest thing ever.
Oh, yeah. He was covered in eyes. He looked gross.
His tongue was an eye.
Yeah. His nose, the tip of his nose was an eye, too.
Yeah, and it just looked amazing, too. Like, I don't even know how they did all that in that. I mean, the other monsters, it's like, okay, it's a guy in a costume. This one, I'm like, yeah, I don't really know. I know I did see somewhere on IMDb, Screaming Mad George has a credit, and Screaming Mad George is known for weird-ass, like, horror makeup, lots of bug stuff, like he did.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But I want to say he had a different credit than I thought he would have on this movie. He wasn't under, like, makeup. I don't even think he was under special effects. I think he was under visual effects, which is not the department that I would associate him with, but maybe this is one of his first movies or something. Maybe that's where he started. But Screaming Mad George, another Asian American given a job by this film, just like all these Gerald Nakamura, Al Leong, all these guys.
Now, I mean, that eye creature could have been him, because I don't think it was like an actual physical effect. I think it was all done.
I know, it is.
Like
it is. No, it's not a CG. Although this, I want to say this, wasn't this ILM or something like that? They had.
Oh, I don't know.
There was like I want to say there was a big production company in the visual effects. Like it was more so than I would have thought, but I could be wrong. Visual effects. Okay, boss. No, okay, no. It was Richard Edlund. Who that's a name I've come across before. Let me look up what he did. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Poltergeist. Yeah, okay, so it's a big name doing the visual effects.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I think I had that written down actually.
Yeah, big visual effects on Big Trouble in Little China, Screaming Mad George. It's just a little weird, but anyways, I've mentioned him a couple times on this podcast before. Born in Japan, incredible makeup effects artist. I would love to know what he specifically did in this movie because I'm just curious because he's like the master of like weird, surreal, like almost Dali inspired like melting creatures and stuff like that. He does that so well, and one of like 5 people involved in Freddy Krueger's death at the end of Nightmare on Elm Street 4. That was like an Avengers of like big horror makeup effects artists like working on that because it was such a complicated effect. He was one of those, and yeah, I love Screaming Mad George. I love that he had a role in this, even though I'm not really sure what that role was. But no, I like the movie. It's not my favorite thing, but I do love the look of the world with the creatures, the sets. I think that it's a good cast. Even I love the dude who plays Egg Shen, Victor Wong. I think he's great. James Hong, I think, does a really great job of like obviously James Hong. James Hong, classic character actor. This is one of the few movies I've seen him in where he's like really has like a big role. Right, because he's always just like a minor guy. Like I think he's in Wayne's World
he's always
2.
like vendor or convenience store
yeah.
guy, or
He's the thing I remember him best for. He's the
Seinfeld.
Yeah, Seinfeld, the Chinese restaurant episode. He's the guy who is a cart ride for cart ride. He's that guy.
That's one of my favorite jokes in that show. Yeah, I love this movie so much, and again, it's just such a fun world to throw yourself into for an hour and 40 minutes. It's interesting, it's funny. We didn't really talk about the comedy in it that much, but there's a lot of like funny lines or like throwaway lines or scenes.
Well, for me, most of the comedy just comes from the lead character just being this kind of bumbling idiot. Like I think that the comedy mostly comes from kind of a fish out of water main character, at least for me. I know there's like more on the nose funny stuff, like you mentioned the moment where he knocks himself out by shooting the ceiling and some rocks falling.
Yeah.
There's like other bits like that.
I don't want to call him a cute character, but he was at the end of it. He was this cute, funny, quirky, lovable buffoon.
He's constantly kind of poking holes in like the dramatic situations of the movie, if you will, because they have that scene where they're in the wheelchairs and they're talking to Lo Pan. And Lo Pan is describing his he needs to marry someone with green eyes or something. And he's like, boy, there's millions of people out there with green eyes. You haven't been looking too hard. You've been on this earth how long? And like he's doing those kind of things. And that's pretty funny.
Yeah, I just think it's a great movie. And it saddens me a bit to know that it didn't do that well in theaters. But I'm kind of glad it didn't, because I think like the last time before the other day that I watched this movie was in theaters. Cineplex had like a classic movie night or something. So me and a friend of mine went to go see it, and there was only like 5 other people in the theater. But it was great. I got to see Big Trouble in Little China on screen, on this big theater screen, and it was just amazing. It was a fun experience, and yeah, it's just sad that this movie's kind of fallen to the wayside, really.
But it hasn't, though. It fell to the wayside, but it's been picked up, and this is like you were saying, this is a cult classic. This is, for John Carpenter, who obviously had a very big career. Like I said, a lot of his best movies were not that successful when they came out, but this is considered a top 5 John Carpenter movie. I think you said it's your favorite. It's not mine. It's probably my 5th or 6th favorite, because I'm one of the few who's seen Elvis, and I think Elvis is amazing. His TV movie with Kurt Russell. It's a very, very good movie, actually. But The Thing and Halloween I love, and then I love Starman. I think Starman is kind of underrated.
Starman's good, yeah.
Starman is like the opposite of all other John Carpenter movies, where it did well when it came out, and I feel like nobody talks about it now. It's like, whereas like The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China, I don't think They Live was even that successful when they came out, and those are movies that are really talked about and hyped up today. And I feel like Starman is every bit as good as those. Maybe not as good as The Thing, but it's an excellent movie, and it's fallen off people's radar. It's fallen to the wayside. Starman has. This movie hasn't.
Okay. Well, there you go, folks. It hasn't fallen off to the wayside. So go out and watch it if you haven't seen it, because it's fantastic. I recommend this movie to everybody all the time. I really do.
It's a fun movie. I think it's got a lot to offer. You don't have to be into like 80s action to really enjoy the movie, because it's not like 80s was the decade of like big shoot 'em up and like Arnold and Stallone and all these like ripped people. It's not that kind of action, and it's certainly a lot sillier.
Also, I want to talk real quickly. The score for this movie is pretty awesome. It's like synth 80s with like
well, it's the classic Carpenter, Alan Howarth, or Al Howarth, however you pronounce that name, score. Because originally Carpenter did the scores by himself, and then at some point he started collaborating with this guy. They might have collaborated on Halloween 2. I can't remember if that's just Carpenter. But Halloween 3 is both of them. This is both of them.
Yeah, and they did like, I think almost every Halloween. Well, every Halloween.
No. You're just flat out wrong.
No, who was it? Well, hold on, I looked it up.
Oh, well, Halloween 4 is just Howarth. It's no John Carpenter.
Yeah, you're right. That's
Halloween
right.
5, I don't know. Halloween 6, I want to say, barely even uses the... Well, there's also famously 2 widely different edits of Halloween 6, so maybe one of them uses classic Carpenter music, one of them doesn't. And then the recent ones, it's Carpenter, but no Howarth. Carpenter works with one of his sons, or maybe his only son, I don't know.
Oh.
And then also... some guy Davies, who's the son of one of the Kinks. I don't know if it's Ray or Dave.
So let's move on. I think we're done.
All right. So The Street Fighter, like I said, a movie I had never seen before. I chose it because I wanted to see it. I was interested in it. Martial arts movies overall, just a genre I haven't seen enough of. And I think this is actually really the first Japanese martial arts movie I've seen. The most martial arts movies I've seen are Hong Kong films, or the American films, or I think what's The Raid? I think The Raid is Indonesian or something.
I think so, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and maybe I've seen a Korean martial arts movie or two, but yeah, I don't think I've seen a whole lot of Japanese ones. And now I've seen one, and I will say that this movie was kind of everything I was hoping it would be. I kind of love this movie. First of all, I watched it on Tubi.
Me too, yeah.
It was the dubbed version on Tubi, so I just want to establish that is the version that we both saw.
Yep.
And that's important because character names are apparently different in the dubbed versus the subtitled version. So
they are, yeah.
But a little bit of background on this movie. This movie was one of the first films released in the U.S. under New Line Cinema.
Oh,
so it was Bob Shaye, future horror legend for his role kind of in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. This was one of his first successes. Even, I noticed in the credits, it said title sequence by Jack Shoulder. I don't know if you remember that name, but Jack Shoulder, director of Nightmare on Elm Street 2, he was involved in some of the early New Line movies when New Line started producing its own movies. Because New Line started as a distribution company Also, I believe it was Bob Shaye that gave Sonny Chiba the name Sonny Chiba, because when this movie came out in Japan, he just went by his real name, which is Shinichi Chiba, and then Robert Shaye looks at that and says, "Yeah, people don't know how to fucking pronounce that." It gives him like, an Anglophonic name. Yeah, so another thing about this is obviously a very violent movie, and I knew that going in. I knew this was like a super violent movie and a lot more violent than the other martial arts movies we've done, which was part of the reason I wanted to see it. But this was actually the first movie, I guess, released in the U.S. that was rated X strictly for violence.
Yeah, I mean, and I believe it.
X-rated movies up to this point were very sexual. Like, there might have been violence, but they would have been things like, Last House on the Left, which has, like, a major rape scene that goes on for a long time. Or Midnight Cowboy was rated X when that came out, and that was... Honestly, it's not that racy of a film, but it had gay characters, and ooh, that's frightening in 1969. What was it? A Clockwork Orange was rated X as well, which that has rape, that has
drug use,
beating a woman with a giant penis chair and stuff. Like there's more than just violence in A Clockwork Orange. So yeah, in this movie there's some sexual elements to it, but not enough to get an X rating, and it really is just for the violence, which is kind of neat.
Mm-hmm. I will say, because I didn't look anything about this movie up. Like, you were like, hey, these are the movies, or like, hey, this is the movie I'm picking. You're picking Big Trouble in Little China. And I said, okay, great.
I didn't tell you you're picking that. I was just saying, like,
no. I know you weren't, but you know what I'm saying.
You mean in the end of the last episode?
Yeah, and I was like, oh, that's right. That's the movie I have to watch again. I didn't look anything up about it, and I was genuinely surprised at the amount of gross, gory stuff that's in it.
Creative, gory stuff. There's some real creativity here.
Okay, yeah.
Including one of the greatest shots in film history, if you ask me, the X-ray punch.
Oh, dude,
that's like the one thing I knew about the movie before I saw it. But obviously, Sonny Chiba passed away recently. I had not heard of this movie until after he passed away, and I heard this was kind of his crowning achievement, if you will. It's kind of like what made him an international star. So anyways, well, the movie starts out, you have this guy named Terry. This is Sonny Chiba. He is posing as a Buddhist priest, and he is going to visit a man on death row, a karate fighter who has been convicted of killing like 7 people or something like that.
Yeah.
He greets him in the cell. He does the little karate, like, hands in front of him and like a little bow, and then the guy who previously has said he doesn't want to speak to anyone, not a lawyer, not a priest, now suddenly wants to speak to him because he recognized that this guy knows karate. It's as simple as that. There's like a brotherhood amongst these people, you know?
Mm-hmm.
After the guards leave, they talk a little bit, but then they just get in a fight. And it's awesome because it's like it cuts to the title like in the middle of the fight, which is so cool. It's just like a freeze frame title comes up and then the fight continues. And so the fight ends, and it's kind of an unfair fight because this other guy, Junjo, is his name. He's cuffed, so he's, at a disadvantage. But the fight ends when Terry uses this like special punch, which uses like has his middle finger out a little bit in a fist, and he hits him on the back of the head, and it's some ancient technique that will like disrupt the flow of oxygen to your brain, and so he's going to fall and collapse and fall into a coma in a few minutes.
Do you know what the name of the punch is?
No.
It's the oxygen coma punch.
Yeah, I thought there was something like that. Yeah, very, very descriptive name. This may or may not be something in martial arts. I know there's like there's all these like ancient techniques in martial arts, and like there's certain things about like, oh, if you hit someone even in this particular spot in the body with even the smallest amount of force, it will kill them or something. Like, I don't know if any of that's true, but we've all kind of heard about that stuff with certain martial arts, right? And that's kind of what this thing is to me. I don't know if it's real, but it functions in the movie and it's perfect. After Terry leaves, Junjo is taken to the noose. He's going to be hanged, but right before he does that, he collapses, and I like the officials gathering around him. It's like, what do we do? Like, he's about to be he's about to be executed, but he has to go to the hospital. And they're like, well, it's in the law that we have to treat any prisoner who falls ill. So they take him to the hospital. But as he's in this ambulance, the ambulance gets stopped by this character of Rat Nose. And Rat Nose is kind of, he's not as comic reliefy as kind of his name would suggest. But he's the bumbling sidekick. He's the Jack Burton role where he just kind of accompanies Terry on all these things, and he really doesn't do a whole lot, and Terry's the one doing everything. But here, Ratnose is actually helpful because he forces the car to stop. He knocks out one of the cops or guards or whatever, and then they end up stealing Junjo. They just take him.
Well, also, in this scene, there's a lot of really interesting camera angles.
Yeah, a lot of Dutch angles.
Yeah, and then I think it's in this scene where, the camera is in the little river when the body's fallen, like when they dump the cop and, the ambulance driver in there. I just didn't expect to see that in, I don't know, a Japanese kung fu movie or a Japanese karate movie from 1974.
Yeah, not kung fu. Kung fu is specifically Chinese.
Well, we already had a kung fu movie. This is our karate movie.
Well, and also there's one line, or it's more than one line, but it's one kind of moment where we establish that Terry is actually part Chinese, and there's something about his father was trying to combine Chinese boxing with karate.
Yes, yeah.
But it's such a minor part of it. That could have been thrown in the translation. That might not have been part of the original movie. Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't think this is a perfect translation in terms of the dub, right? Because they even imply that the Yakuza is originally from Hong Kong.
Yeah, which
and that's just flat out not true. Yeah. like to my knowledge, anyways.
Yeah, because what was it? They were like, oh yeah, the Yakuza, they're based in
Hong Kong. You guys have come down from Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Is this something? Like, what? No, it started in Japan. It's a Japanese word. They started in Japan. So, anyways, the next day or sometime later, Terry and Ratnose are just kind of hanging out in their apartment or whatever that they live together, and it's like a high-rise. It's not like a super nice apartment, but we see later it's pretty freaking high up off the ground. And that is when Junjo's brother and sister come in. So apparently they had hired Terry to kidnap the brother to break him out of prison, but they don't have the money that Terry required of them, because they had given him a down payment of some sort with a promise of paying him more after he's out. But since they don't have the money, he's like, I'm not giving you his location. I'm just not. And then he flat out threatens the sister, who, what's her name, Nachi or something like that?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Nachi, yeah. He says, he says something about, making her a whore. And we're thinking, this is our protagonist. This guy's a fucking asshole. I love it. And then so a fight breaks out, and Junjo's brother does a jump kick, and Terry ducks. So Junjo's brother, goes out the window and falls to his death. We get this fun shot of him upside down falling while there's a rear screen projection. And then when he hits the ground, we see this just giant splat of blood, which is awesome.
Yeah, it is. It's really good, actually.
Looked a lot better than a similar scene in Halloween Kills, I will say, now that we're talking about John Carpenter earlier.
Take that, John.
Well, John Carpenter didn't direct that film. He did the musical score.
You're right.
Some
Take
hack
that,
director
John's franchise.
David Gordon Green. The comedy legend David Gordon Green directed Halloween Kills, and it shows. Anyways, so after this, Terry makes good on his threat, and he sells Nachi into sex slavery. And again, you're thinking, this is our protagonist? What is going on?
Yeah, it's pretty rough, to be honest. He's a pretty unlikable character, to be honest.
Yeah, he changed. If I have a big complaint about this movie, because overall I did love it, I absolutely enjoyed it. This was just a thrilling watch beginning to end. Eventually he kind of becomes a character of honor, and it's never clear when that change happens. It just kind of happens.
Yeah.
Because here he's just a mean old bastard, and he just does stuff for money, and he gets away with it because he can just kick anybody's ass, and we see that, and it's glorious when he does. But yeah, he sells her into sex slavery, and then this businessman asks to meet with him to discuss. They want to hire him to kidnap a woman who's being protected by her uncle who runs this like legendary karate dojo. This woman, Sarai, however you pronounce it, Sarai, I think sounds right. She's an heiress to a major, I think is it an oil fortune?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's an oil, that's the dub, who knows? Who knows what business it is originally, but yeah. Because her father has passed away. So she's the central heiress to all of this money, well, to a lot of money. He's one of the biggest businessmen, I guess, in Japan. But these guys want to hire Terry to kidnap her. He doesn't want to do it, but then when he discovers that they're Yakuza, he's even more like, oh shit, I am not doing this. Because he finds this tattoo on the guy's arm, and I guess it's a Yakuza tattoo. But I love the scene when he's leaving. He just gives them this like maniacal smile and just like slow walks backwards out the door. He's just thinking like, I can kill you guys whenever I want to. It's so great because he's so awesome. But then, like, the second he leaves, the other Yakuza people, so there's this guy, the guy he sold Nachi into sex slavery to, Mutaguchi, and this woman, I don't recall getting the woman's name. I'm sure she has a name because she's a pretty big character in the movie, but...
Yeah, is she the one that's, like, wearing red throughout the movie?
Yeah. Yeah, at one point she looks like like an equestrian jumper. She's dressed like that. She has, like, the boots and everything.
That's exactly it, yeah.
Yeah, so these are the two, they're the heads of this particular Yakuza syndicate. I think she's the head, really, but they say that, okay, A, we need to kidnap her, but B, we also need to kill Terry because he's a bigger threat to us than Sarai's uncle, even. As Terry works out at his home gym with Ratnose speaking words of encouragement, there's a funny little reveal where he's doing all these pull-ups, and you see Ratnose alongside him also doing them, but then the camera just moves a bit and you see that Ratnose is actually standing on the ground and he's just like, he's not actually doing pull-ups, he's just kind of along for the ride. They're working out. Then a bunch of Yakuza break into the house and Terry beats the shit out of them.
Oh, yeah.
I liked this scene. This is our first real big 1v many action scene. We get a number of these. The way it's shot, I think this is really interesting to me because a problem I have with martial arts movies, generally speaking, and this is just you just kind of have to have some suspend your disbelief a bit, but
yeah,
there's always this like it's a martial artist and he's fighting a bunch of people. Oftentimes they're armed, either with guns or swords or something, and you like kick him, you punch him, you knock him out or whatever, but usually you don't actually kill them, and then it's like they just don't get up, and it's just like you know what I mean, like in big like 1v many scenes.
Yeah, or they all take their time to like they all wait for their turn to attack.
Yeah, and that's
character.
going on here in this scene where for the most part, but I also like it's not so much in this scene, we see it a lot more later. We also see when Terry beats the shit out of someone, we see them like wailing on the ground in pain, which you don't see in other martial arts movies, at least not movies that I've seen. So you can really see that, oh, that person cannot get up. That person is like done.
Well, there's a really rough one right at the end of this scene where he punches the guy in the mouth and he just spits out a bunch of his teeth.
Oh, it's incredible. That is so awesome.
Well, there's even a scene near the end where he punches a guy so hard in the gut that he just vomits. Like vomit. Yeah, it just comes out of his mouth. And I'm like, that's disgusting. And there's like chunks of corn and you're like, oh, stop it.
Yeah, it was just like,
really
it was
cool.
like who knows what. It was just great. But yeah, the teeth thing, and I like, you mentioned that. This movie, I would say, has like a perfect escalation of violence. You know what I mean? The first scene we have, the fight in the prison cell, nothing extreme. And then when they fight the cops or the guards or whatever to kidnap him, I'm like, okay, nothing extreme. Then he fights the Junjo's brother and sister. I'm like, okay, nothing too extreme. And at this point, I'm almost thinking like, I was told this is like one of the most violent movies ever. Is it just like a little bit more violent than a Bruce Lee movie, maybe? But then Junjo's brother does a flying kick out the window and falls to his death, and there's like a Dario Argento amount of blood on the ground. I'm like, okay, I'm starting to see it. But the first big moment of violence isn't even really the result of Terry. So the first real savage Terry moment is punching the teeth out here. It gets more and more until the scene on the ship, I think, is just like one after the other, just people getting wiped out in beautifully horrific and creative ways.
People getting killed or maimed in a variety of ways.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, but I think it really does build. Like it starts you kind of slow. It eases you into the violence, and then just goes eventually. Like right now, we're at level 4 or 5 of the violence, and we eventually get to 11 easy. You know.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking there's the one scene that made me uncomfortable, and I'm not.
I know the scene. Eventually. Yeah, that's actually because that's kind of at the end of the second act. That's arguably the most horrific thing that happens in the movie. Although the very end of the movie compares, but yes.
Yeah. Well, so what was that character's name again? I think he had the coolest name in the whole movie. His name was King Stone, I think.
The black guy.
Yeah.
I didn't catch a name, but yeah,
that's the coolest character, King Stone.
Yeah, he's involved in the first initial rape of Nachi when she's being sold into slavery, and then later on he is about to rape Sarai, and he gets what's coming to him in a big way, and in a way that if you've seen, I mentioned Last House on the Left earlier. If you've seen that, this is similar but even more graphic, and yeah, it's amazing. We'll get to it. Anyways, so Terry and Ratnose go to the karate dojo with Sarai's uncle, who's Masaoka. They break in. Again, we kind of see how useless Ratnose is. It's really just Terry doing all the work, and he gets up to Sarai's room and almost like makes like he's going to rape her.
Yeah.
But he ends up threatening her, and he says, like, I need to speak to Masaoka, and I was like, listen, I'm going to fight you one-on-one to prove that your karate ain't shit, basically. And you're looking at the actor that plays Masaoka, and you're kind of thinking, like, oh, this won't be, this will be a quick fight, because the he's kind of short and heavy, and, like, doesn't look like he's in great shape, and yeah, you don't expect him to put up as good a fight as he does, but when they meet in, like, the gym, first it's a couple of the pupils that fight, and he takes care of them easy. But then Masaoka actually fights, and Masaoka is good. It's a very even fight for a while, but eventually Masaoka has the upper hand, and he slams him, and he like slides across the floor, and he goes headfirst into like a table or like some board or something. And then Masaoka comes up to him and says, like, you remind me of this guy I met years ago in China who, as I mentioned earlier, was combining Chinese boxing with karate. It's like, are you his son? And then we see a flashback within Terry's head to when he was a young boy, and his father is being executed as an enemy to the Japanese state. I don't know if it's because he married a Chinese woman, because this is kind of the World War II era,
Yeah.
But they shoot him, the death by firing squad. It's weird because it's after he dies is when you hear his like last words to his son, which is just kind of weird how they edit that. But then the words are basically, don't trust anyone. It's like, okay, so we can kind of see how the father's death has influenced this guy into being just one of the meanest motherfuckers around. Then the theme song kicks in, back in the present. And first of all, we didn't discuss the theme song earlier, but...
Great theme song.
It's a great theme song. It's not... It's sort of a combination of two styles, of two, like, subgenres of film that I love. Because you have the rhythm guitar is doing that, like, waka chicka, like, kind of the blaxploitation, the funk sound a little bit, which is not an unusual sound in martial arts movies. I've heard that in others. And then the lead guitar kind of reminded me a little bit of like a spaghetti western, had that sound to it, which also I want to say I've heard that in a few martial arts films. But those two things together, I think, just made it really cool.
For any of you anime watchers out there, much like myself, this theme is akin to the Naruto battle theme from the original Naruto TV show. So there you go. Sorry. Okay, you can move on now.
Yeah, you can't see my look of disapproval, but believe me, you know it's there.
I know. I wish we were doing the Squadcast thing so I could see your look of disappointment.
Anyways, as this song kicks in, Terry, like, regains his strength and ends up fighting Masaoka to, like, a draw, I guess. I mean, he kind of wins, but I think because he won the earlier round, it's basically a draw. And then they end up talking, and Terry tells them that the Yakuza are after his niece and that he would like to help and protect her. But Sarai is against this because she's like, this guy's an animal. I don't want him anywhere near me, which is fair. I mean, the guy is just a menace. But
it really is, yeah.
But Masaoka respects him. Not just, he even says something like, I don't just respect your fighting abilities, but I respect you as a man, and I'm really not sure why. Because if there's one thing we've seen of Terry, it's that he has no honor, and he's just, I love it, because in some ways he's like the least likable protagonist ever. But that's what makes me like him more.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like that he sold a woman into sex slavery, but I respect that the movie doesn't try to make him a hero, really, until it does. It eventually kind of does. But I like, this is that era. This is the 70s. This is Dirty Harry, Death Wish. We have these, like, hard-boiled protagonists who kind of ride the line between good and evil. There's really not much of a line that this guy rides. He's every bit as bloodthirsty as the villains.
Yeah, well, and really, I mean, going back to what you were saying earlier, it's hard to tell when he kind of became the good guy.
Yeah.
And it's got to be after this scene in the dojo, right, where he kind of has something to do, which is protect Sarai.
Right, I suppose. But even then, he's still later talking about the money he wants to get, though. There's still not really the attachment to the nobility, I guess, of the goal.
Yeah, that's fair. You're right.
But you're right. I think it has to be this scene here, and I think it has to be maybe the faith that Masaoka puts in him or something, because, again, Masaoka recognizes that he's a good guy, even though we don't know why. Because I would say it's like, oh, maybe it's the invoking of his father, except his father's whole thing was we see that his father's dying words were, don't trust anybody. Like, stick up only for yourself.
Yeah.
So it's like, that can't really be the reason why he ends up kind of pursuing noble goals. So I don't know. It's just, it's a blot against the movie, to be perfectly honest. But at the end of the day, this is one of those movies where if you want to see action, if you want to see horrific acts of violence being performed on teeth and guts and heads and penises, then this is the movie for you, really. I mean, it's just... I don't need this movie to be character-driven, is what I'm saying. I think it maybe would have been a little bit better if they did something a little bit different with the character, but, for what it is, it's very good.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
So at this point, the Yakuza recruits help from Hong Kong, which involves Din Sao, who I guess is some gang leader there. I don't know if he's a triad or, again, this is the universe where the Yakuza originated in Hong Kong, so maybe he's a Yakuza leader. And then they also find Junjo, who is hanging out at a bar, and he's eventually taken to see the prostitutes that they have to offer, and he recognizes his sister, and he's like, oh my God. And then he talks to the sister, and the sister says what happened, and says that Terry did this, you need to kill Terry.
Mm-hmm.
And even earlier, I think there was a line, I don't know if it was a Terry line or if it was a Junjo line. I think it was a Terry line, but in that scene in the prison, I think he said something like, I would be honored to meet you in a death match, like if you were to ever get out of prison or something like that. So it was set up a bit earlier, but now big-time motivation for Junjo.
Yeah, and also because I'm pretty sure you mentioned this at the beginning, but he's the last great street fighter of Okinawa, I think. So they have kind of like a...
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Wait, Junjo?
Yeah, so they have this kind of like street fighter bond sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's a... Well, we see her later on, there's a bit of the honor of martial arts is kind of invoked a little bit by Din Sao. And again, this is like, as someone who never learned martial arts, but knows just a tiny bit about it, there's a lot of focus on like a respect, and it's an art form, and you have to honor and respect the art form, but you also have to respect your opponent. And there's a little bit of that invoked by Din Sao. Notice amongst the two white people that don't get the honor of the fight going on, which we'll get to that later. But so at this point, this is the greatest scene in cinematic history coming up here. Actually, it's probably not even my favorite scene in the movie, but my favorite moment in the movie. So Ratnose and Terry are following Sarai in their car, but traffic stops and Terry and Ratnose, their car is picked up by one of those bulldozers. Or not a bulldozer, what do you...
An excavator.
And it's dropped into like this big reservoir, basically.
Yeah.
And it's like amazing when it happens. You're thinking like, oh shit, there's no way they died. Or there's no way they live. Yeah. But of course they do, because, he's Terry. But a couple of Yakuza, I think it's two of them go down into the reservoir, open up the car door. They struggle to open up the car door, which is interesting because you notice when the car got dropped, the door clearly opened when it hit the ground, so someone closed it. Ratnose, who's badly injured and, as he usually is in the movie, completely useless. This is all Terry. Terry fights back. He fights these people, and he does the coolest move ever, which is the X-ray skull punch. He like jumps up at this guy.
Yeah.
Then
it's
cut
like a Mortal Kombat thing.
To a shot of an X-ray skull, and then a hand, like a bony hand, coming and hitting it on the top of the skull. You see, it's a really brief shot, but you see a moment where the skull caves in just a tiny bit because it's like a rubber prop, I'm sure. And then we cut back to the non-X-ray view, and that guy just spews blood out his mouth. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's really
probably the coolest thing I've ever seen in a movie, and I'm not exaggerating. It is up there. One of the, so awesome. I've got the GIF pulled up on my computer. I'm looking at it right now. There's two separate GIFs, because there's the one with the blood spewing. There's the one where it's just the skull.
Yeah, well, there's also a point later on in the movie. I mean, it's not like as cool as the X-ray skull shot, but he chops somebody in the head, and you can see their head is caved in, and and their head just starts bleeding profusely.
That's the samurai guy, I think you're talking about, right?
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
Anyways, and then obviously Terry kills this other guy. So Terry and Ratnose go to the office of the Yakuza people. They fight a few more people. They fight this big guy. I want to say they killed him in a pretty cool way, but I can't remember exactly. But I'm sure it was cool and horrifically violent. Then they come across Junjo and sister, Junjo and Nachi.
Mm-hmm.
They fight for a bit, and this is important because at one point, because there's a dagger involved, like a Raphael dagger. Junjo brings that and he throws it and it misses, and Terry picks it up and he threatens Nachi with it. And Junjo has an important line where he says, "You can't threaten me with her life because she would gladly die if it meant that I would kill you," or something. And it's like, oh, that's kind of harsh and brutal, but hey, it comes back later in a big way. He's not wrong. He's not lying. But Terry, before he can be defeated, which I'm not really sure if he's ever truly losing this fight, but he ends up jumping out the window onto the truck that Ratnose has started, and they take off. I don't know when they got this truck. I guess this is the Yakuza truck that stopped in front of them that forced them to get picked up by the excavator, right? Because their car's obviously fucking totaled. Yeah. So then they head to... I don't actually know where they're going at this point, but meanwhile, Sarai is kidnapped. And Sarai's own uncle has turned against her at this point, right? Isn't that what that scene was?
Yeah, I'm struggling to really remember. I have something written down about it, but
because they're pulling up to a home, or maybe not a home, maybe it's the karate dojo.
I didn't think that was her uncle.
I thought it was the uncle, because her drivers feel threatened, and then they start fighting, and then they take off, and then they stop in the road because the blind samurai and Din Sao are there, and it's Din Sao that kidnaps her. Yeah,
well, I thought it was there was a guy who was a part of her father's company, and he met with her. a few scenes.
Yeah,
before
but
that.
we don't see that guy. That's the white guy you're talking about, right? Because that guy doesn't really get involved until on the ship, I don't think.
Oh, I thought it was a Japanese man. Anyways.
Oh, maybe we're talking about a different person then. I don't know, but
either way, it's confusing. But you're right; she does get kidnapped.
Well, if the uncle doesn't turn against her, we never see the uncle again. We never see the uncle again at any rate, whether he turns against her or not. I thought he turned against her. I could be wrong. This is a little kind of this kind of section of the movie because they go to the samurai because I'm not really sure why they're following Sarai to begin with. I'm talking about Terry and Ratnose here because Sarai doesn't want them hired. But they're following her. I don't know where Sarai is going, first of all. Then Terry, even though they should be trying to follow Sarai, they divert and go to the Yakuza hideout. Well, I guess because they want to kill people, but I don't know. Yeah, this section of the movie a little confusing. Sarai has been captured, and she's held captive in this beautiful location alongside a riverbank there on like a hill. Not quite a cliff, but a very steep hill. And looks like a beautiful, almost like a hotel room. This looks like a very nice
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It looks like she's holed up in a hotel.
Yeah, overlooking a river, and she notices that Terry and Ratnose, who I don't know how they know she's there, but they know, they're approaching in a boat, which is very loud, by the way. I want to point that out. This is not a stealthy entrance.
Yeah, yeah.
Meanwhile, that black guy that you named earlier, I don't remember the name.
King Stone.
King Stone comes into the room, and he's supposed to just give her food, but he decides to rape her. And while this is happening...
Sorry, yeah.
While this is happening, Terry climbs up the hill and then sneaks in and kills the guy. And how does he kill him? By ripping his dick and or balls off. Amazing stuff. I understand this is the scene earlier that you said was a bit too much. I understand that. I perfectly get that. But I respect the hell out of a moment like this, you know? They went there. A lot of movies wouldn't.
Yeah, I'll be honest. It was really impressive. It was really impressive to see. It was exciting. But as soon as it happened, I was like, oh, like I clenched a bit.
I kind of expected it. I did not know about this movie beforehand, but I kind of expected it because it would be like a fitting poetic death for this guy, right? Because he's the rapist and everything. So it's like, okay, if there's poetic justice in this film's universe, and there might not be, because you can argue Terry deserves to die as much as anybody, but if there's poetic justice here, this guy's going to get it, and he does. So Terry takes Sarai down to the boat. They're being swarmed by dozens of guards, martial artists, Din Sao among them, and Terry has them get away on the boat, and he stays back to fight. And you have kind of the first real Terry versus Din Sao action, which this is kind of set up as like a... I think his two real big competitors in terms of worthy adversaries in terms of martial arts skill are Junjo and Din Sao.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, because everyone else is just like, he's got the businessman villains and stuff like that.
Everybody else is just fodder to him.
Yeah, pretty much. Even the, you brought up the Blind Samurai earlier. He sort of, he's important later for something he does, but there's not really like that's just like a one-off fight, I think. But anyways, at any rate, the fight is interrupted by the Yakuza people, and Terry is captured, where he's taken to the top of the cliff, tied to a tree, and is beaten. And meanwhile, he has told Ratnose to like wait at a specific spot, and after a while, Ratnose is getting worried because he hasn't arrived yet, so he goes out there, try and see what's up. He then gets captured, but he's trying to speak to get them to release Terry, and he's even willing to give up Sarai's position, which Terry tells him not to do. And this is that moment where it becomes clear, oh, Terry's actually a good guy, but we don't really know why, because now suddenly he doesn't care. He welcomes death as long as it means Sarai can live, and that transition's never really clear. Eventually, Ratnose gives away Terry's position, but they're still going to kill Terry though. And it's Din Sao who takes his sword, swings it, which breaks the ropes that hold Terry in place, and it sends him plummeting off the cliff into the river. But as we find later, when Ratnose goes down to the riverbanks to fetch him out. He's still alive. And in a heartbreaking scene, Terry just tells Ratnose to fuck off and says that he doesn't want anything to do with him ever again because he betrayed him.
Yeah, and he essentially calls him useless. He's like, you're useless, you're bad at what you do, you didn't listen
Which
to me.
I've already been kind of saying, so we can see that.
Yeah.
but at the very least, you kind of think like, okay, yeah, he's not a fighter, he's not a martial artist, he walks around with like a stick and he hits people with it a few times, but really he's not much of an ally in the fight. But you think at the very least, okay, this guy's like a loyal friend, he's a ride or die, right? But no, he's not really, or at least he is, but he screws up massively, I guess.
Yeah.
And I like that. It's kind of an emotional scene, actually, for this character that's kind of a goofy side character. He just starts screaming like, Terry, and he's crying, and it's kind of heartbreaking. He says, like, I'll be your slave for the rest of my life, just let me redeem myself. We go to kind of an emotional beat that I don't think you expect from a movie where someone gets their dick ripped off by someone's hand, but we go there, and it gets even more emotional later, as I kind of alluded to.
Yeah, and I mean, you genuinely feel bad for him. He's like a guy who's got nothing else in his life other than Terry.
Right? Yeah. Because what's his backstory? There's like I think he says some of it here. I think Terry like saved him from something, or like he like found him, and I don't know. There's like a couple lines. I think it's in this scene where he kind of implies how far back they go or something, and.
I guess this heartbreak is short-lived compared to what's coming up directly after this.
Well, that's also pretty short-lived. It's a bigger, yeah. More effective emotional scene. But in terms of how quickly we move on from it, that's also pretty short-lived, I would say. I know the scene you're talking about, because later we see Yakuza woman. She's taking Sarai to the docks to a ship, and this is, I just want to point out. This bothered me. You know, I get it. Like, you're doing a dubbed movie and you're not doing subtitles. But when we get an establishing shot that pops up and you get these Japanese characters that are clearly telling you what the location is, can we get a subtitle for that location, please? How difficult is that? I noticed one of those scenes. It was clearly Hong Kong because you could see from some of the boats in the water and some of the structures, like, okay, this is Hong Kong. I recognize the iconography of the city, but like this, I assume is like Tokyo, but like Tokyo Bay or something. Like it's saying something. They probably even tell us the name of the ship, because we get that scene later on when they're on the ship. It just shows the big ship and again some Japanese characters on board. So they probably told us what the name of the ship is. Not that that's that important. Maybe they just told us where they are in the water. But this is where, so Terry has followed Sarai, but this is where he runs into the blind samurai. And they have a little bit of a fight on this big dock pier loading, area. And then some random asshole comes in on a motorcycle, just like kind of out of nowhere. And the blind samurai swings his sword and hits him, and the guy crashes into the wall and just hits the deck. And then the fight, it's like kind of random, but then the fight continues. Terry, of course, kills the blind samurai. You mentioned it. He like hits him on top of the head, which like crushes his skull in, and there's a lot of blood. And then he goes and sees that it's Ratnose, who has arrived on the motorcycle trying to redeem himself. And it looks like he didn't really have a plan. He was just coming to save the day. Yeah, he kind of just got in the way. Yeah,
he barreled in there straight into his sword and then collapsed.
Yeah, you got to admire the effort, but you got to question the methods, I guess. Anyways, this is an emotional scene because we even see Terry even cries. He forms tears in this scene, which, Terry, not exactly the most in tune with his emotions male character.
Mm-hmm.
You can see even when he condemned Ratnose earlier, like, I'm sure he felt bad about it. Like, I'm sure he has a lot of... This is a true friendship, and but he felt betrayed, and now he feels, a good sense of honor that this character has come back to try and redeem himself, but it's just ended horribly, of course. So all of the Yakuza and the evil people are aboard the ship. They bring her to her lawyer or something, who she recognizes, and she's happy to see this is a white guy. And she's like, oh, you're here. And then the guy's like, hey, I need you to sign this. I think she's like explaining her story, like, oh, they kidnapped me. I didn't have anything to do with this. But like he's clearly in on it with them. Mm-hmm. He gives her a contract. He says, you need to sign this. This will give all of the money to the Yakuza. And it's like, we will force you to sign this. And then he even drops the knowledge bomb that, oh, by the way, your father that died, he didn't die by himself. He needed a little bit of help, I think is how he describes it or something. And it's like, okay, I think we could kind of piece that together. It's not really a necessary detail, but, I like it. It's meanwhile, Din Sao goes up to Junjo and says that he will give him his entire business if he kills Terry. But meanwhile, they're on this ship, and it's like, what's he talking about? Like, Terry's not there. Obviously, Terry arrives there, and he arrives there soon after this scene. But it's just kind of like a weird moment. But Din Sao is the one, I guess, again, he's running some kind of Hong Kong crime syndicate, possibly Yakuza, possibly Triad, possibly who knows. I think he's also the one running that bar with the sex slaves, I think, too, right?
Din Sao? Yeah, I think so, too.
I think so. So here, Junjo, I grant you the business where I once enslaved your sister. I mean, he didn't know it was his sister, but still, it's like it's kind of a weird offer. But again, he has to kill Terry first. So Terry gets aboard the ship, and this is my favorite scene of the movie. This is, at first he just kills like one guard, and this is, of course, at night. And then it's guard after guard after guard. There's like 3 people that approach him near a ladder. He beats the shit out of them. This is where you really see, like, each person who's down is in so much pain. They're just, like, rolling around on the ground. And then this is when he punches the guy in the stomach, which causes him to throw up. There's, like, blood everywhere. It's so violent.
Yeah, and also, like, there's this one guy he grabs by the arm and kind of, like, twists him around, and you can see the guy writhing in pain. And then he snaps his arm.
He snaps it, like, 3 or 4 times. I think he breaks the arm, like, 4 times in this scene. It's crazy.
Yeah, like, I would die from pain, honestly. If that happened to me in real life, I would just die. But yeah, like, it's the most over-the-top action scene I think we've probably seen in this podcast.
I think any John Wick scene is kind of, because John Wick's very stylized over-the-top action. It's a different kind of over-the-top.
Yeah.
But John Wick, I think, is comparable.
Well, you're not seeing any vomit or, like, missing teeth in...
No, but you are seeing Willem Dafoe's face, and which is more horrific to look at.
Yeah.
Anyways, at this point, all of the Yakuza, all of the upper-class people, all of the more powerful people realize what's going on, so they just send more and more men, and they're up on, like, what would you call this? Like not a rafters, like a balcony? Or, they're upstairs.
Yeah, they're just, like, upstairs in the ship, right?
Well, I'm just thinking specifically on this, like, hallway where he's fighting all these guys. And I think only one guy has a gun, and of course he gets thrown to the ground, and Terry stomps out his foot while he shoots a few bullets just, like, off into the sky. Really great stuff. He's fighting all these guys. There's a really awesome moment where he kind of gets thrown over the ledge, but he grabs on. And then the bad guy is stomping at Terry's hands to try and get him to let go and fall. But he instead pulls him by the leg and then pulls himself up and, like, chokes out the guy with his own legs, like does a Xenia Onatop kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then eventually just flings him over the balcony to his death. And this is a huge splat of blood when he hits the ground.
It was like somebody threw a watermelon at the ground.
Oh yeah,
that's what it looked like.
Yes, yeah, it's out there, and so it's a lot more violent even than than Junjo's brother when he hit the ground.
Yeah.
Even though it's a much shorter fall, but again, that's that escalation of violence. The movie is getting more and more violent as it goes along, which I just appreciate from, like, a ramp up level, like I hesitate to say dramatic stakes, because I don't think this movie has a lot of dramatic power, but
but you're right, because you reach a certain point where you're like, oh, it can't get any crazier than this, and then it does, and you're like, wow, that's so impressive, that's awesome.
Yep. Then Terry breaks into the room where most of the big bad people are hanging out. He kills the woman. Then, as a couple of the white people are about to shoot him, Din Sao stops them and says, no, guys, we let Junjo fight him to the death. And if Junjo fails, then I will step in and I will kill him. But, like, let's not shoot him. And this is, like, Din Sao is the one who believes in kind of the stuff I was talking about, like kind of the honor of martial arts as an art form, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So they agree to fight. They fight outside. It's pouring rain, of course. And then first off, Terry says, like, if I win, I get to take the girl and we just go away.
Yeah.
And they agree to it. But meanwhile, there's these two white guys who are, they have second thoughts. And as these two men are fighting, Junjo and Terry, one of the guys shoots Terry in the back, which pisses off Din Sao. Din Sao just takes out his sword and slices up those guys because they had no respect for the honor. And I like this as like a white people don't get it moment,
Yeah.
So the fight proceeds. It's a violent fight, but, it's not a whole lot compared to what else we've seen in the movie. Then Nachi, Junjo's sister, comes out, and she, like, pins...
She just, like, hugs him. She
hugs him, and she, like, pins him against, like, a wall. And she says... Because, again, he's got the Raphael dagger, and she says, "Here, stab me, stab through me, and you will kill us both," or something. So kind of going back to that line where where Junjo said, my sister would be happy to die as long as it meant you also died. And it turns out he was right. I mean, she is happy to die. So he stabs through his own sister's back, killing her and severely wounding Terry, who steps away very battered, but not dead quite yet, and he falls to the ground. Sarai, who recognizes, obviously, that, if he dies, she's screwed. She tries to get him up, but it doesn't work. And then Junjo goes in for the final blow, right? Terry's on the ground, and he's going to just stomp on his head. Or he's going to punch him in the head, I think, because he leans in. But as he's doing that, Terry turns his head a little bit, and then he reaches up, grabs Junjo by the throat, and then rips it off.
Yeah, rips his throat right out.
What I love about that is it doesn't just end there. We get this shot of Terry still on the ground holding this, like, throat in his hand.
Yeah.
In between the camera and his face is this, like, throat, which is, who knows, like a goat, something from a goat or a cow or something. And he's just holding it, and he just starts kind of, like, laughing like a maniac, like a crazy person. And then that's pretty much how the movie ends.
Yeah.
Din Sao doesn't step in and fight anymore, right? Din Sao's still alive, but yeah. So Din Sao recognizes that, okay, this guy has earned his victory, so he's not there. And then as the credits, before the credits kick in, it says the end for now. And this is because obviously by the time this movie was released in the U.S., I'm sure the sequels, or at least one sequel to this movie, had been made, so they were getting you ready for that, and they said he'll return in the Revenge of the Street Fighter, I think is the name of the first sequel.
Yeah. There's
also it's Return of the Street Fighter, and then there's the Street Fighter's Last Revenge. It's a trilogy. There's also a couple spin-offs. There's like Sister Street Fighter or Lady Street Fighter, which might be the same movie and just alternate titles. They might be two movies. One or both of those might have sequels. I don't know, but there's a Street Fighter cinematic universe out there if you want to find it, folks. But that is the Street Fighter. Jim, what did you think of it?
It is a fun, action-packed, gory bloodbath of a movie that surprises you with how gory it is. I think it's great. I was genuinely on the edge of my seat for most of it. I really wanted to know how it ended. Yeah, all the fighting in it was really impressive. My favorite fight scene was probably Terry and Kendo at the dojo.
Oh, Masaoka, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was great. Everything was just so interesting to watch. And again, like, being so violent, I don't want to say it made it more enjoyable, but it did. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there was more weight behind everything.
Yes, because this, I think if you look at it, especially because we haven't seen a truly great martial arts film yet on this podcast in terms of, Game of Death. There's some great martial arts sequences, but it's this weird Bruce Lee is dead and we're capitalizing off of him kind of movie.
Yeah.
And then Dolomite obviously is some of the worst martial arts ever captured on film. And then John Wick, it's like there's martial arts, but it's more about the gunplay. This movie, I think there's an argument to be made. I don't think it's a great martial arts film. I don't think the actual martial arts, the choreography, I don't think is that great. It's good enough. Mm-hmm. And I think it makes up for maybe its deficiencies in that department with the horrific violence. It becomes this like ultra-violent, like Lucio Fulci, if Lucio Fulci directed a martial arts movie thing, and I love that. I haven't seen a movie like this. Because the Bruce Lee movies, those are PG movies. There's a little bit of blood, but like the most violent thing that happens there is Chuck Norris gets some of his chest hair ripped off. Like those aren't really violent,
yeah, well,
and I'm sure The Raid is more violent than those, but it's still not this.
Yeah, I mean, with a martial arts movie, you expect the movie to be about the martial arts. This movie's about the outcome of the martial arts. This movie's about the gore. This movie's about how badly people can be beaten up, like, and again, I just think of that guy spitting his teeth out in like a river of blood coming out of his mouth. Like, it's just it's so brutal, but it's just so fun to watch, I don't want to sound like a serial killer, like, oh, I love blood and people spitting teeth out. But yeah, I just thought it was great. I really enjoyed it.
It's, again, this movie was kind of what I was expecting it to be in what I knew about this movie, and yet I don't have a problem with that. It was everything I wanted it to be and kind of more. Like, it was very entertaining. I thought the scene when he snuck onto the ship was incredible. It just kept going because he takes out like 3 or 4 people and like, okay, this is an exciting action scene if it ends here. But no, then it's a couple dozen more people and it just goes on for so long. And it's like this, it's like you're watching The Terminator. And that's really what it felt like. And that's what Terry is. And that's really fun to see.
It's you have a guy motivated by, well, actually, I guess at this point,
he's not really motivated. That's the thing.
Yeah,
that's part of the magic of it, and we'll get to that.
He's just
when
a guy
I talk
that can't
about
be stopped.
Yeah. So, Jim, which of these 2 movies did you prefer?
Usually I thought I was going to pick Big Trouble in Little China because I love that movie, but I have to go with Christ. What's the name of this movie again? The Street Fighter.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to go with the Street Fighter. It was just something that I wasn't expecting. It blew me out of the water with its
really knocked your teeth out,
action and gore. Yeah.
Yeah, again.
Oh, shut up.
I mean, for the most part, the only thing I knew about this movie was I knew it was violent. I knew Sonny Chiba was in it, and I knew the skull punch, the X-ray skull punch. That was about it. I didn't realize that the X-ray skull punch was like the 8th most violent thing that happens in the movie, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah. It was all just really impressive. And then even like when you learn that this came out in 1974.
Well, it's wow. Japan. This goes along with kind of the running joke of this podcast. I've mentioned Japanese cinema, to me, is exclusively made up of big monster costumes stomping on miniatures and the most horrifically violent things you've ever seen. This movie sticks in line with that. This has more in common with the Takashi Miike movies than it does with the Bruce Lee movies,
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of just like, this isn't your granddad's martial arts picture.
Yeah, it was something. Much like I tell everybody to go out and watch Big Trouble in Little China if you haven't seen it, I'm now going to start recommending this movie to people. I'm like, oh, you want to see some crazy fucking movie?
I will recommend this movie to many people too, but there is a limited audience with this one. This does not have the broad appeal that Big Trouble in Little China has. There will be people that are turned off by this movie. This movie is, I know I mentioned this earlier. I don't know if it was one of our episodes or one of our commentary tracks, but I talked about the Red Letter Media has referred to this like a few times, not often, but the idea of a grandma movie, which is the type of movie that like anyone can watch, including your grandma. This is not a grandma movie. This is the furthest thing from a grandma movie.
This will kill your grandmother.
So I think I will recommend this movie as well, but I'm definitely aware that it has limited appeal. But I am going to agree with you. I did prefer this movie to Big Trouble in Little China. It was relatively close for me, but I couldn't deny this felt truly unique in terms of I haven't seen a martial arts picture quite like this, and it was a fresh experience. I mean, Big Trouble in Little China felt pretty fresh too because I hadn't seen it in so long.
The interesting thing here is that we have 2 movies that are pretty unique.
I wanted to say what I really like about this, and this will kind of go into my next question, because obviously we're going to discuss, does this work as a drive-in double feature? I'm going to say yes, and one of the big reasons is because we have two very, very, they're different, but they're also just unique protagonists in terms of, if you're making a traditional adventure picture, a hero, these are not the characters you would have as your leader or as your lead character. In Big Trouble in Little China, we have this bumbling idiot, this, again, Ash in Army of Darkness, I think is a good comparison. And then in the Street Fighter, you have this psychopath. And these are not the characters that you would drop in your mind to star in these roles. And that's one thing that I think makes them part of what makes the movies special. And then I think that they're so different even from each other, not just different from a normal movie, but they're different enough from each other that there's like an interesting balance in watching one movie than watching the other one.
Big Trouble in Little China leads nicely into the Street Fighter because you do have over-the-top, weird, mystical stuff that not only can you sort of not wrap your head around it, but you're like left with like a lot of questions. And then you also have things, like corpses upside down in water. You have a guy blowing up in an over-the-top fashion. But then you move to a movie that's like firmly based in reality. It's
a heightened reality.
Yeah, where the guy is kicking the shit out of people so badly that they're like expelling vomit, and teeth.
It's certainly a far less romantic film than Big Trouble in Little China, in the sense that it is more. It's a dirty film. Not that Big Trouble in Little China is this ultra clean movie or anything, but this movie is just such a freaking dirty, exploitation-y follow-up. And I think that's interesting that we have obviously a common thread in a little bit of Asian flavor, I think is the phrase that I used earlier. There's a little bit of martial arts in both. Street Fighter is a proper martial arts film. Big Trouble in Little China, I wouldn't really call it a martial arts film, but obviously there's martial arts in it. And then, Big Trouble in Little China is this kind of, I don't want to say complicated story, but it's a story that's kind of all over the place. It's a movie that's kind of all over the place. And the Street Fighter is so refreshingly simple in that it's basically one guy against the world. We've kind of talked about his character motivation doesn't really make sense. His character development doesn't really make sense. It's never clear when that happens. It's really, you just watch it to see him kill people, and I think it's wonderful.
I think it's fun. Maybe we should pick our own movies more often.
Well, you need me to pick as interesting a movie as the Street Fighter next time. I'll have to find something else I haven't seen. Anyways, you want to hear what we're doing next week? Well, Jim, you already kind of know, but listeners, next week is going to be our last episode of our second season. We will be returning likely in October after that, but next week we are doing an awards presentation, so to speak. I think it's going to bear resemblance to our season 1 recap. We're going to be discussing similar topics such as best kills, best movie, but we're breaking it down award by award. And I want to call this like the Drive-In Academy Awards, except that's a phrase Joe Bob Briggs uses all the time. I doubt it's copyrighted, but I still don't want to steal it. But that's sort of what this is going to be. We're going to talk about that. Thank you for joining us. Jim, thank you for joining me on this wonderful journey into Asian culture, whether it be fictional John Carpenter's imagination of it, or Sonny Chiba's imagination of it, his interpretation of how easily Japanese men can be killed and how in such violent ways. But this has been a blast, this double feature. I think this is one of our better double features, honestly. I think we saved one of the best for last.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. We should think about doing this once a season. Maybe the last episode.
Well, that's what we're always doing from now on. You and I have already drafted the movies for season 3, and I mentioned that we're doing where we pick a movie. We're also going to have our guests on Patreon pick a double feature for us, so patreon.com/Revenge of the Drive-In. Check that out so you'll be able to vote on what we do in an episode, as well as listen to our commentary tracks and get early access to episodes, as well as to longer extended cuts of episodes. So see what racist joke Jim made that got cut from the episode or something like that. I don't know. No, I kid. I see, but yeah, we cut some jokes just to kind of keep the flow of the movie up sometimes, and it's usually just kind of straightforward. Like, yeah. Anyways, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, talk to you later, everybody. Bye for now.